Margaret, there's something I should have told you 25 years ago. The words came out quietly, but in the middle of the warm dining room, they sounded louder than Daniel Carter expected. For a moment, the only thing anyone could hear was the soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the ticking of the clock above the doorway. Margaret Carter was holding a glass of iced tea halfway to her lips when she froze. Across the table, their son Ethan stopped cutting into his steak. Rachel, Ethan's wife, looked from one face to another, unsure if this was supposed to be a joke. Daniel sat very still at the end of the table, his hands folded together like he had practiced this moment 100 times in his head. The small house in Columbus, Ohio had seen countless family dinners over the years, but none of them had ever felt like this. Margaret slowly set her glass down. "Daniel," she said gently, the way she always did when she thought her husband was being dramatic. "What on earth are you talking about?" Daniel looked at her for a long time before answering. So long that it had started to feel like a wall he carried around with him. 25 years of silence. 25 years of waking up every morning and choosing not to say something. He could still remember the exact night the secret began. It was late summer. The air had been thick and warm, and the windows in their old apartment had been opened because the air conditioner had broken again. Back then, Margaret had been pregnant with Ethan, and the two of them were young enough to believe that hard work would solve almost any problem. Daniel had been working 2 jobs at the time. During the day, he repaired appliances, and at night, he drove a delivery van for a grocery store. Life was busy, but it was simple, or at least he thought it was. That night, he had come home just after midnight, tired enough that his legs felt like they belonged to someone else. Margaret had already gone to bed. The living room lamp was still on, and the apartment smelled faintly like the chicken soup she had cooked earlier. Daniel remembered smiling when he saw the folded baby blanket sitting on the couch, soft and thick, big enough to wrap around a newborn. He picked it up and held it for a moment, imagining the tiny person who would soon be part of their lives. At that time, Daniel believed he understood what his future looked like. He believed that the next few decades would be predictable. Work, family dinners, holidays, maybe a small house one day. But life has a strange way of placing one small moment in front of you and quietly changing everything. It happened the following afternoon. Daniel had been fixing a refrigerator in a house about 10 miles away when the shop phone rang. The call came from the hospital. Margaret had gone into early labor. Daniel drove faster than he probably should have, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. By the time he reached the hospital parking lot, the sun was already setting behind the brick buildings. He ran through the sliding doors and asked the nurse at the desk where his wife was. She gave him a calm smile and pointed him toward the maternity floor. Daniel still remembered the smell of disinfectant and floors. When he finally reached Margaret's room, she was sleeping. A nurse told him the doctors had everything under control and that he should sit down and rest. He pulled a chair close to the bed and watched his wife breathe slowly, one hand resting on the blanket over her stomach. It was supposed to be one of the happiest nights of his life. But later, sometime after midnight, something happened that Daniel never expected. A doctor he had never met before stepped into the hallway and asked him if he could talk for a moment. Daniel followed him down the corridor, assuming it was just routine paperwork or instructions. Instead, the doctor closed the door to a small office and sat across from him with a serious expression. Daniel noticed right away that the man kept tapping a pen on the desk. "Mr. Carter," the doctor said carefully, "there's a small issue with the paperwork we received earlier." Daniel didn't understand what that meant, but he nodded anyway. The doctor explained that during standard hospital procedures, certain medical tests had been reviewed. Most of the detailability, records, and verification floated through the air. Then the doctor paused and said something that made Daniel feel like the floor had shifted beneath his feet. For a moment, he thought he must have misunderstood. He asked the doctor to repeat it. The doctor did, slowly this time. Daniel stared at the wall behind the man's shoulder, trying to make sense of what he had just heard. It was the kind of information that didn't feel real at first, like hearing news about a stranger instead of your own life. He thought about Margaret sleeping in that hospital room. He thought about the baby who would arrive within hours. He thought about how happy she had been all week, folding tiny clothes and talking about the future. And in that quiet office, Daniel made the first decision that would shape the next 25 years of his life. He decided not to say anything. Not that night. Not the next day. Not ever, if he could help it. When Ethan was born a few hours later, Daniel stood beside Margaret and held her hand while she cried with relief and joy. The nurse placed the tiny baby blanket. Ethan had a full head of dark hair and a loud, determined cry that made the nurses laugh. Daniel looked down at the child and felt something unexpected rise in his chest. It wasn't confusion. It wasn't doubt. It was something simple and powerful. Love. Immediate and absolute. Margaret looked up at him with tears in her eyes. "Isn't he perfect?" she whispered. Daniel nodded. "Yeah," he said softly. "He really is." And that was the moment he locked the truth away. Over the years that followed, life moved forward the way life always does. Ethan grew up playing baseball in the park 2 blocks away. Margaret volunteered at the local library every Saturday morning. Daniel kept fixing appliances and eventually opened a small repair shop of his own. To anyone watching from the outside, the Carter family looked ordinary in the best possible way. They had backyard barbecues in the summer and decorated the living room with bright lights every December. Ethan learned to ride a bike on the cracked sidewalk in front of the hay. While the first time, laughing and shouting encouragement until Ethan finally pedaled on his own. There were school plays, graduation ceremonies, road trips that stretched across hundreds of miles of open highway. And through all of it, Daniel carried his secret quietly, like a stone in his pocket that no one else could see. Some nights, he would sit alone in the living room after everyone else had gone to bed and wonder if he had done the right thing. But every morning when Ethan called him Dad, the questions seemed to fade away again. Years passed. Ethan grew taller than Daniel by the time he turned 17. He left for college in Illinois, about 300 miles away, and Margaret cried in the driveway after the car disappeared around the corner. Daniel hugged her and told her everything would be fine. In many ways it was. Ethan graduated, found a good job, and eventually met Rachel. Their wedding took place on a bright spring afternoon in a small park near the river. Daniel stood proudly beside his son, adjusting Ethan's tie, and believed the past would stay exactly where he had left it. Until 3 months ago. That was when the letter arrived. It came in a plain white envelope with no return address. Daniel almost threw it away with the rest of the mail, assuming it was another advertisement or utility notice. But something about the handwriting on the front made him pause. He opened it at the kitchen counter while Margaret was outside watering the flowers. The message inside was short, only a few sentences. But those sentences were enough to make Daniel sit down slowly in the nearest chair. Because whoever wrote that letter knew the truth. The same truth Daniel had been protecting for 25 years. At first he told himself it had to be a mistake, some kind of misunderstanding. But deep down he knew better. Secrets rarely stay buried forever. They wait patiently, sometimes for decades, until the moment they decide to return. For weeks Daniel carried the letter folded in his wallet. He read it again and again late at night when the house was quiet. Each time he reached the same conclusion, and Ethan might hear it from the wrong person. And that was something Daniel could not allow. So tonight, sitting at the table with the people he loved most, he finally said the words he had rehearsed in silence for months. Margaret looked at him now with a mixture of curiosity and concern. Ethan leaned forward slightly, sensing that whatever was coming next would matter. Daniel took a slow breath and looked at each of them in turn. His voice, when he spoke again, was steady but softer than before. "The truth is, there's something about the night Ethan was born that I never told anyone." The room fell completely silent. Even the ticking clock seemed to pause. Daniel glanced at the window where the last light of the evening had faded into darkness. 25 years of silence had brought him to this exact moment. And for the first time in a very long time,